We're literally projected in the next 12 months, and this is going to be a very specific number. We're projected to make $117,000 of added revenue based on just those 2 codes alone. I mean, that's huge.
That's huge.
And for all the practice owners out there listening, that does not require any additional payroll. Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Strata PT. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of Strata PT, talks with Justin Stiver, the owner of Total Therapy Florida. Justin grew the practice from 1 to now 7 clinics across Florida. Paul and Justin talk through understanding RTM codes, the complexities of using RTM with non-tech savvy patients, how RTM increases a clinic's profitability, and how Justin and his practices continued therapy during recent devastating hurricanes in Florida. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
I think RTM is one of those things that is definitely profitable from a business sense on its own, and definitely something that can improve patient outcomes. You know, they can do the work anywhere and that sort of thing, right? But then the devil's in the details, and I think the biggest reason why most practice owners don't embrace it as openly and aggressively as they can is because all that profitability and all those better outcomes take a lot of work because you've got like third-party systems and not a lot of understanding. So is that a fair statement to say that on paper they're profitable, but it's the implementation that kills all the profits?
Yeah, there's a couple different parts of RTM that you could split it off into. One is, the initial setup and the maintenance codes, which are the 9975, 9977. And for just to make sure everyone understands what we're talking about, because I have been surprised on certain Facebook posts that I've seen where I get practice owners saying, what's RTM stand for? And I'm going to be honest with you, I was in that same boat about 12 months ago. So remote therapeutic monitoring, RTM is a few years ago now. These codes were released as new CPT codes under Medicare's fee schedule, and they are being paid now, reimbursed. At least Medicare does, and other insurance companies are starting to jump on board, and I expect that to happen more in the future. But we focus primarily on Medicare patients right now because that's the payer who we know is going to pay, and we know what they're going to pay, et cetera. There's another nuance of the private payers having to charge a copay for your visit, too, which is confusing and still think needs to be clarified amongst all these other payers. But basically the 9975, 9977 codes, specifically 9975, you're getting paid basically to set up your patient with a digital interactive home exercise program. There's a few different vendors out there that have this option. And in order to build that 9975, you need to get them to log in to that software, and that way you can have the open communication from back and forth, them sending data to you, and you see. And that's something that most private practice owners are already doing for most of their patients. They're already setting them up with HEPs. Maybe they're not doing as good a job as they should of getting them to actually log into the digital side. They're setting it up for more of their own tracking purposes so that their therapist, the next time they go to update they have it there and they know what they did. For this purpose, it requires you to have your patient actually log in. This was a big hurdle because we have a giant Medicare population. Mostly aren't very tech savvy, even though they're getting more and more tech savvy all the time. But a lot of them were just so used to printing out that program for them and walking up there with a handout that has their exercises on there. So that's something first that we had to work through, because we had to change that dynamic and say, look, here's the truth, guys. The patient's going to benefit if they actually do log in to do this. I know there's going to be some friction there because they're not used to having to do that and they're not super tech savvy. But if they can log in to get it, to get that first login, we can bill this initial code, um, which, by the way, the 98975, it's over $20. It's around $20. So you're getting paid, 20 bucks extra just for setting up that code the first time. And then if they interact with this home exercise program, and actually it's just if if your program is able to send data back and forth for 16 days, I believe it is, in a 30-day period, then you can build this 9977 code, which pays you a little over $40. So depending on if it's a PT or a PTA doing it, obviously. You can only bill 9975 once. 9977 you can bill every 30 days that you're treating that patient or that you're monitoring that patient. We as a company have a standard to where we monitor for 30 days after their discharge to make sure that they're still engaging with their AGP. If they discharge to home and they have any issues, they can call us up and we can update their home exercise program. So we set a date for 30 days after they discharge from the clinic. So on an average plan of care that might be for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, say, just to be even, we'll monitor them for 3 months, basically. So we can build that 997.5 code, that first code one time. And then the second month, we can build the 9977. And the third month, we can build the 9977. So in the 9977, in the first month, if it's been, they log in 16 times or whatever. So it's really, but the key there is being able to get your therapist during an eval to complete that and actually get the person to log in. So we've done a great job of that. We started off maybe less than 50% effectiveness there, and we're up closer to around 85%. So 85% of our Medicare patients that are coming in for an eval are getting logged in and set up on that first code. So, and that pretty much guarantees us, if they're coming to us for 3 months under monitoring, that pretty much guarantees us $120, $130 of extra revenue that we don't have to work too hard for. It's all in the setup and making sure that they're still able to get into it. So now the 9980 and 9981 codes are the actual monitoring codes. So, and you don't have to do the monitoring. You can do the setup and not monitor. But those codes, you can have a PTA working from home or whatever it is. You could have your team, if they have downtime in the clinic, monitoring. And that's basically every minute that you spend looking over all their plan of cares, their home exercise program, and just making sure that there's no missing links, making sure that the patient is doing what they're supposed to do. And then in order to build both of those codes, you need to have, and I forget how they define it, but you basically have to talk to that patient, whether it's on the phone or in person. You have to talk to them and make sure that they're doing well. If they have any questions, you answer that for them. So we have a team that does the monitoring, and they are not necessarily updating home exercise programs because that's something that we dealt with working out the procedures. Our PTs in the clinic don't really want the RTM therapists that don't really know this patient changing things. So we put into our systems that, you're making sure they're logistically able to do it. And if there's any issues, if the patient says, yes, this one hurts me, then you're going back to the therapist and you're telling them, hey, your patient that you're seeing today at 2 p.m. did give me feedback on their home exercise program that they're having trouble. And then the therapist can then update that home exercise program and work on it with the patient in the clinic. So it's a really smooth system. It took a little kinks there, but I would say just I think the practices that could jump into this right now that aren't doing it, maybe listening now, would be either the small micro practices that have a lot of control over what they do, or the practices that have good standard operating procedures and can implement these things, because it's not just something you can jump into if you're not organized.
The way you talk about these codes and stuff like that, obviously you've been doing this for, I think, at least a couple months now, at least in your practice, you've been doing it, operationally for a couple months here, but, h like, you talk about it with a certain ease now because you kinda know the numbers and all that, but, uh, h how did you learn all this? Like, was it did you go read something? Was this just trial and error over the last 6 months? Like, how did like the way you just talked about it, you were like, actually, let me back up. I love what you just tied it off with there. You said, like, hey, here's the kind of practice it would work for. And you said, you got to have your processes in order. That's so true. But then in order to make those processes work, you also have to have like an understanding of like how much these things pay and, all the different codes, all that stuff. How did that start for you? Was this like you Googled it? I mean, well, how did you learn enough to create that first process?
Yeah, you read as much as you can, and probably for 4 to 6 months before I really made a move and decided to act on it. I was just analyzing, reading things, trying to make sense of it. And, honestly, what pushed me over the edge was your podcast. Like I had a good understanding of what RTM was, to be honest with you. And this is the magic behind this stuff that you guys do is, I had a good understanding. I knew that we needed to do it. It kept falling like number 4 or 5 on my list every quarter. And I only got through three, so it kept getting bumped to the next quarter, bumped to the next quarter. This happened for about a year. um, in that meantime, I'm seeing more people talking about it. There's a couple people that I heard on your podcast making businesses out of RTM consulting and RTM tech. um, and I just hearing different voices. I'm always a visual or an auditory learner. I can read stuff, but when I start hearing people contextualize it and put it into practice, that's when like the wires get hooked up for me. And that's what happened. And then I think I reached out to you and I said, hey, could you give me an introduction to this guy and that guy? And I did, and I listened to him, and then we ended up moving forward with a company who it's a staffing company for that helps with the remote therapeutic monitoring, and part of their program is in order for them to do their job they have to educate their clients. So they educated me on that, and we've been using them for the last year. And eventually, to be honest with you, I think we're going to go 100% in house, just because we're so organized and everything that I think that makes sense for us. But I would say to someone starting up, don't be afraid of interviewing a few companies that help with remote therapeutic monitoring. Because for us, even if you have to give away a good chunk of what you're making off RTM, it's better to act if you're paralyzed because you don't feel comfortable going into it. It's better to have a partner for a set contracted amount of time to help get you on your feet, and then plan on, if you think if that works out forever, great. If you think you can get it in house, then great. But I would say just don't let the next year go by when you don't try and do something with it, because I'm telling you that we're making about $175, best as I can tell, about $175 a profit off of every patient that we engage into RTM right now. So um, and that's huge. I mean, that's more margin than we make off of 10 visits. I mean,
Well,
and that
it's
obviously it's only Medicare, so it's not every patient that we see, but
the other thing I'll just say about you is I love that I feel like it's so taboo to talk about money. I mean, I know we're supposed to talk about better patient outcomes and all these things, but you know, just what you just shared there, it's like there's a way to provide those better outcomes, but also make money doing it. And just the fact that you're willing to talk about margins and dollars, like I think that's really neat, and I wish more clinic owners would do that, because that's really what this is supposed to be about, right? Like if we would just all become a little less romantic about how we make our money and recognize there are ways to make money. I don't know. It seems like such a simple idea.
I feel like this RTM thing has been a little bit of a bone thrown out to the PT community, and I do think that people should grab it. And I think it's something that we've been doing forever, and finally, we can get paid for some of the things that we do, even if it's just collecting that 9975 and 9977 code. It's well worth it. I mean, I know. So our company and just I like you said, I like talking about numbers because there's nothing wrong about making money, because my company, any money that we make, we put it back into the company to serve more people and hire more people and become better. So I have no expensive boat parked behind me that I'm worried about, but I would say our 9975, 9977 codes, I mean, we're literally projected in the next 12 months to, and this is going to be a very specific number, but we're projected to make $117,000 of added revenue based on just those 2 codes alone. I mean,
Yeah, full stop. I
that's
mean,
huge.
let's drop the mic right there. That's huge.
And for all the
Yeah.
practice owners out there listening, that does not require any additional payroll. That's the biggest thing I want people to understand. Those 2 codes do not require additional payroll. They will require possibly a little bit of technology cost. Maybe you have to pay for RTM with your home exercise program that you're using, but it's not going to be anywhere near $117,000 per year. So, if you and that's based on our total revenue. I mean, that's like a 3% bump in revenue. 0.8% increase in total.
Can you talk about yeah, ROI positive there, and I love that the message of like processes. You kind of alluded, and maybe I misheard you. I just want to make sure I understand. You alluded to something about what I I think you were talking about how you had to train your staff as well. Um, how was this like? How was this received? I mean, and obviously don't say anything you're not allowed to say or don't want to say, but you're looking at your team. One of the other things I've heard from practice owners around the country is this idea of like, I'll ask them directly, why aren't you doing RTM? And one of the other things I'll hear pretty often is like, it's so hard to find PTs. The last thing I want to do is train them on something new, and scare them into thinking they have to do more work and all that. Um, was that a problem you had to overcome in any way with your clinic?
A little bit, but I wouldn't say it's anything more than anything you ever change. Which obviously we have to change stuff all the time, just because the industry changes. Whether it's reporting MIPS or doing something like there's just crap that you have to change and add to in order to do things even just legally. So I mean, there's constant change going on in the PT industry that we have to pay attention to, and I think you're dealing with the same friction with your therapist, regardless of what it is. It's not specific to RTM. So, but I would say the biggest, I had a few therapists being like, I'm worried about this. I don't know if I can do it. I said, okay, well, our therapists do evals for 45 minutes, most time a little bit more, more towards the 53-minute mark, because another therapist will start their next patient for them, so they have extra time with their evals. And we're usually billing a PT eval and maybe 2 or 3 units of treatment on top of that during that time slot. So when I started talking to our therapists, which I can engage with our therapists on financial stuff pretty easily because I talk a lot of financial stuff with them, so it makes sense for them. They're used to hearing this type of stuff. Is I said, okay, how long is this taking you? And like, it takes like 5 to 10 minutes. If I have a really tech savvy person, it'll take 3 minutes. If I have a average Medicare beneficiary that struggles with stuff, it's like 8 to 10 minutes of extra work for me. And I'm like, okay, well, when you bill that therapeutic exercise as your 4th code of the day, we might be getting, $20 from that code. Okay. Just so you guys know, to put it into perspective, you might be getting $20 for that 15-minute timed code after MPPR and all that stuff. So if you just take the time to set them up with this, our practice will make an additional $175. Okay. So I'm like, this is much more important financially than that extra timed code that you're used to getting. So I hope you can do it as just part of your flow and the person's easy. But if you have to only bill 1 or 2, codes instead of the 2 or 3, and get them to enroll in RTM, just so you know, I would much rather you spend the extra few minutes with them to get them enrolled in RTM. I was pitched from the people that are pro RTM before I was implementing it that when you start doing RTM, you will see that the patients love it and that the care is better. And that was kind of like, okay, that's a sales pitch. I don't think that's going to be true, but we'll see. I will say that is true. It's it adds value to what you do, and the people do. And once they get into the digital program, which is the biggest hurdle for you to get them in there, once they get into it, they actually start to use it. Okay. And we've gone back and forth with how to sell it and the sales pitch and everything. And the biggest way that we say it is like, look, I know you're used to going to physical therapy and getting printouts. Well, every 2 weeks we give you another printout. And then you go to the next place down the street and your doctor or whoever else gives you their own printout. And I was like, you have all these printouts. After a few months of working, some of these are outdated, some of them aren't, irrelevant. It's hard to track. So what we do, we want you to log in. We at least want you to log in so that when you need it, you have access to the most recent and the most relevant and the most updated home exercise program. We have a lot of part-time residents, and I say, even if you're out of town or you don't really need to come back in for therapy and it's 6 months later, you call us up and you say, hey, Justin, I got these 5 exercises you sent me home with. 3 of them are super easy and I feel like I'm not getting anything out of it. And I say, all right, let's jump on a telehealth real quick. I'll update your home exercise program. I got it right there. You can see exactly what I'm doing and I can tweak it. And I think ultimately it does save the healthcare system money. It gets people the care they need sooner, and it's better. And that goes over really well with patients. And you just have to add a little bit of context. Would that take me maybe 45 seconds to explain that to you? So that's kind of the 45-second pitch we give our patients, and everything works out good.
In the pre-show, we talked a little bit about, you know, your practices for people that have heard your previous episodes with us. They'll know that like all your practices are in Florida, and um, here we are near the end of 2024, and 2 hurricanes kind of came through within 3 weeks of each other, and kind of affected things. When you rolled out RTM 6 months or so ago, that ability to have sort of the I guess let me just ask the question directly, and you can take a pass if you don't want to talk about this. But some of your clinics had to be offline for up to 7 days because of power, lack of water. Your team's affected, the community's affected, things like that. But did RTM help ease that sort of that revenue hit as a business owner? And maybe the answer is too early to say, but did it help at all? Is it something you
Yeah,
could
no, I
notice?
mean, the only therapist that logged hours, the only therapist that made us revenue during that 7 days are our RTM therapists. I think that's probably what you're getting at.
Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't want to like front load the question because I also think it's a sensitive topic, but let me just overshare here a little bit. From our perspective, obviously we see all the data across all the practices that use our systems. And one of the interesting things is that, and I'm speaking in broad strokes, like, when I think about geographically where the communities were affected, the interesting thing, and I'm only hesitating because I don't want to seem insensitive to like the human cost of these storms. But what I found really interesting from a unit volume standpoint is that if you pull out RTM codes across all of our customers that are in the affected areas of those two storms, you definitely can see where the storm hit because those locations physically went offline, patients stopped going, visits stopped happening, units stopped flowing. What's really interesting is when you then bring the RTM codes back in to the query for those same locations, I think, and I might be misquoting our report here, but what we found is that when you added RTM codes back in, the total dip was something no greater than like 0.5% of overall unit volume because the RTM codes kind of made up the difference. And again, I'm going to keep putting my disclaimers on this because I'm not trying to be insensitive, but I think there's something interesting here to say that like in the worst case scenario of 2 hurricanes within 3 weeks, patients were able to continue some of their care remotely, whether they were 500 miles inland, riding out the storm or not. And clinicians were able to kind of log in and do their part of that without, regardless of whether or not the physical location that they practiced from was open. And that I think is an interesting sort of hedge that I don't think very many people are talking about right now in terms of RTM as well, is that it allows you to keep operating even if the physical location is in trouble.
That's a huge, like, unexpected thing that happened there. But it kind of relates to just downtime in general. Like, downtime for a hurricane is just a major catastrophic regular version of downtime. So I would say we have 3 therapists that are employees of ours that are paid hourly, who are PTAs. Actually, one's a PT, who do RTM for us, and they're hybrid people. So they'll say in our our Osprey clinic, we have, during season, we really need 5 therapists or PTAs full time. And out of season, we drop by about 20%. So we drop about 1 full-time employee. So what we did, once we started implementing RTM, is we went to that employee who happened to be down with her baby, off for 12 weeks anyway, and she was looking to come back about the same time we're rolling out RTM. So I thought she'd be perfect for it. Hey, you can work in the clinic twice a week, and then you can do RTM the other three days per week. And as we start getting busier, what's nice about the 8.0 and 8.1 monitoring codes, they're not like required. So if you start, if you don't have to monitor that patient if you don't want to. So even if they get pulled out of RTM into the priority of treating in the clinic, you can just drop it, not monitor, and you can treat patients in the clinic. Vice versa, if things shut down, you can go to full-time RTM. And that was great because our schedule fell apart. We took that 5th person off of the schedule, and she stayed home and she just ripped out RTM all week long. So what's nice about that too is she's getting paid. So, other hourly employees didn't get paid for downtime we had for the storm. So, all of a sudden after the storm, I've had a few employees reach out to me and be like, hey, can I train on RTM so that if this happens again, I'm like, heck yeah, you can, so, and that's something that I think every practice owner should understand, that even if you're not in a hurricane zone, you're worried about floods or anything like that and shutting down for 7 days like we are, if you have downtime in your clinics and you even just have one therapist in your clinic out of 4 or 5 that is like your go-to RTM person, and the schedule falls apart, shift everybody onto the other people's schedule, maximize their units, and then put that person in the back room or send them home to do RTM. And then we pay RTM off of productivity. So like however many codes we bill because of the work that you did, you make X percentage of that code. So it's a very easy algorithm. You don't have to trust that someone's going to be 100% productive at home, and they don't have to be. They can go home and spend 30 minutes with their kids and then RTM for an hour. It doesn't matter because we're only paying them based on what they generate as far as codes go. So it's a great product or service that to hedge your downtime in your clinics also, and make revenue that you wouldn't have made if it wasn't for RTM.
Right. Yeah, it's like the summary of this is basically like, in the best case scenario, it's a significant amount of revenue and profitability increase, for a clinic that's operating in, normally. And in the worst case scenario, it's kind of like an insurance policy. You can still continue helping patients, billing time, all those things if the main office is down. And I know we're talking about hurricanes, which, somebody listening to this from Montana is like, what does this have to do with me? But, you know, the reality is an office can go offline for a lot of reasons. It could be that, the water main broke down the street and, you can't run, or the power line got cut or something like that, or, the landlord screwed something up. So there's a lot of things that can take a practice down. Um, and so it's an interesting angle, I think, that not enough people are talking about right now.
Well, how many practice owners ever have one of their therapists say, I'm sick, I can't come into work? We're at post COVID world. You can't come into work sick anymore. So, that doesn't mean the therapist doesn't want to make money though. I've been sick plenty of times. I'm sure you have too, and everybody else that's listening, where you really can't be in front of patients snotting all over them, but you could be sitting in front of your computer doing RTM stuff and maybe making a few phone calls.
Yeah, it's like one more option to, you obviously always have the option to burn some PTO or sick days, but yeah, if this is an option, you could be seeing patients from home. And yeah, so that's it. I mean, it's really interesting. It's like, I I don't, and to be totally transparent to everybody, like, we don't have RTM fully baked into our system. We're doing integrations with third parties, like, and that's kind of how we got started with you on that topic, and some others as well. I don't really have like a horse in the fight here or a dog in the fight here. Like, there's probably a bunch of different providers out there, but these conceptual ideas are really fascinating because nobody's thinking about it. I don't come from this industry, right? But like when I came away from PPS, I was at PPS a couple weeks ago. When I came away from PPS, the topic of RTM was really fascinating to me because you would hear people on stages talk about RTM, and they were almost always they were like the CEO of like an RTM company, right? Uh, and then even on the show floor, when you look at these vendors, no offense to anybody, but like the vendors on the floor, they kind of like all say and do the same thing. Like you can do RTM. The really interesting part to me about PPS is in the after hours when you're hanging out with practice owners and, they've had 3 beers, ultimately they'd be like, yeah, it seems good on paper, but I don't know how to deploy it. I don't want to piss off my people. And they're not talking about all this stuff that you're talking about here, because that's the flip side is that coming out of PPS, I'm looking at the data of our practices or our customers that were affected by the storms. And I distinctly ran a query to see, what it was. And it was just so fascinating. Again, if you take the RTM codes out, depending on where those practices were specifically, related to both of those hurricanes, they were offline from anywhere from half a day to 8 days, just depending on how much damage and power was out and all that. But once you brought the RTM codes back in, those particular practices really didn't see much dip at all. You could see them actually cranking out the units from wherever they were. It could have been 500 miles away inland, but they were still helping patients. So super fascinating. And
So the way I see us rolling it out, because you just said, some of these practice owners is how do I implement it, and how do I work it into my PTs as a positive versus a negative? The way we're looking at doing it is looking at RTM as a module of training that our therapists can all take. They're probably going to have to do a lot of it on their own time and it doesn't take much. I mean, it takes literally 10 hours of, at the most, maybe 5 hours of training, research, knowledge. It's all stuff they know how to do. They just need to learn the rules. So they learn the rules by taking our quick module, online training module for RTM, how to implement it with our systems, and then they become RTM certified at Total Therapy. So the only other thing we didn't talk about is I have a subset of employees that love to hustle. They want to make more money. They're coming to me all the time saying, "How do I make more money, Justin?" And I'm like, "Well, let's talk through it." And this is one good way, because they could be sitting on their couch at 10 o'clock at night doing RTM, and because we are reimbursing our therapists per code, if they're clocking 40 hours per week in patient care, direct patient care, they're going to get paid for 40 hours. If they do 20 more hours of RTM on the weekends and nights, they're going to get paid for 20 more hours of RTM. And it's a really good way to keep people happy. So if the practice owners listening thinking, I'm worried about my therapist being unhappy, there's always two sides of that coin. This is also a really good way to keep your therapist happy.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. Strata PT is a single EMR platform and revenue cycle management service for physical, occupational, and speech therapy practices that helps you achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate. If you'd like to learn more about Strata PT and see how our EMR and RCM works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.